The Personal Data Protection Bill 2019 is finally out. The bill is yet to be made public as it's listed for introduction in Parliament's winter session. The bill lays out a framework which includes regulations around usage and storage of personal data. The bill actually was circulated among MPs today. It's expected that it will be tabled later this week or before the winter session actually ends. Now remember, the draft bill was out in 2018. So we know to some extent what it's all about. And effectively, the purpose has been to protect all of our data and put into place a law which actually gives citizens the rights over their data. But there are changes in the version which will now be tabled on the floor of the House, possibly this week or next. To talk about that and more, I'm joined now by Dr. Arghya Sengupta, Research Director at Vidhi Centre for Legal Policy. Thank you for speaking with us, Mr. Sengupta. First off, the key changes you're seeing in the bill compared to the 2018 draft version.
Okay, see, I think the basic structure of the bill remains the same. So I'm delighted by the fact that large-scale changes to the bill have not been made. Having said that, I notice three key changes. The first is that the localization provision has been whittled down. So now all personal data does not necessarily have to reside in India. No copy has to be kept in India. Now, my views are clear. I think localization is the way forward. The government seems to have accepted the principle, but whittled it down for companies and to make the bill perhaps more palatable. I think this is a change that is a compromise, and every bill is a compromise. So I'm happy to live with this compromise if it means there's greater consensus. Number one. Number two, as far as the provision regarding national security is concerned, there seems to be another compromise that has been made there, because it has changed from the provision that the Sri Krishna committee gave. I think that the change, we must be guarded about the way in which this change works out. There's one positive, which is the fact that any national security related request must now also be by law, which is something that follows the Puttaswamy judgment. So even if there are agencies of government which currently are executive bodies, we don't know what's happening, whether they are actually collecting information, who they are sharing it with, it will now have to be by a government order under section 35 of this bill. So that I think is a change. It must work with safeguards and procedures. We will have to see what those safeguards and procedures are. And number three is social media verification. This is an interesting change because very honestly, this seems to be a case of the government trying to kill two birds with one stone. Social media verification is an issue which we've heard about for a while. The Supreme Court has been looking at whether there should be Aadhaar linkage. It really doesn't belong in a data protection bill. Having said that, the provision that has been put out there legally, if we were to read it, it seems a little bit like the Twitter blue tick being mandated by law. So if you want to verify your profile with your KYC, you can do it, and perhaps there will be something like a blue tick which will say KYC verified. But if you don't want to do it, you don't do it. So it's actually innocuous in that way. It could have been much worse in terms of mandatory Aadhaar linked. So I think that this is a change which is a surprise, frankly, in the data protection bill. But again, if this is something that helps the bill get passed, I'm happy about that.
It's also interesting because of how many people will want to be verified, even if it means giving up their personal data and linking it to social media. So yeah, interesting point there. But you know, the other one, Mr. Sengupta, which everyone is pointing out to, and it's a change from the draft bill. It includes sections that will allow the centre to ask any data fiduciary or data processor to hand over anonymized personal data or other non-personal data that will allow better governance or targeting of citizen welfare services. That's the language of the bill. Is it sending out red flags to you?
It might, depending on the way in which it operates. So there are 2 points here. One is that anonymized personal data is outside the scope of this bill. It's basically data that shouldn't be able to affect your privacy if something happens to it. There are 2 red flags. One, what is the level of anonymization that is necessary? That's something that will have to be determined by the Data Protection Authority. We know that a lot of reverse engineering is possible to de-anonymize what is anonymous data. So we must be careful that the standards of anonymity are set high, number one. And number two, any information that is asked for must be cognizant that it can't ask for trade secrets or any other proprietary algorithms that companies might have. I think that if these 2 safeguards are met, then the provision's okay. But per se, I think that again, this has something to do with non-personal data. Government does need non-personal data. So it really depends on what use case you have in mind. As in, if the government wants data from Uber saying how many passengers are taking Ubers from point A to point B to decide whether they should build an express metro line, that seems okay. But if the government is asking for information saying from Google saying how many people in this constituency are searching for the Congress or the BJP, then it's a problem. So the proof of the pudding is in the eating. We'll have to see how it plays out. But yes, there is potential for there's potential for both great benefit or for damage. It will just have to see the way it works out.
You know, let me come to the most important question really at the end of it all. The whole point of this exercise is to bring in a law which will keep our data safe. And in the current scenario, everyone's data is, awash. It's available everywhere. There's zero concept of data privacy. Does this bill work towards that very basic need?
So I think, Tamanna, any move in the direction of a data protection legislation, whether we agree with the provisions or not, is helping in that cause, because currently there is virtually nothing. Okay, so if you compare it to what we have today, then any step is a big step. Okay, so but that's a really low threshold. But even if I were to take this question more seriously, the fact is that as the Sri Krishna Committee had reported and the government has continued this, the individual is at the center of this bill. Consent is at the center of this bill. And this is essentially the first move towards implementing the right to privacy that the Supreme Court laid down in the Puttaswamy case and several cases before that. So I think that in terms of protecting the individual, there are several provisions here, starting from the need for informed consent, moving on to the need for data trust scores to make these legal notices that you and I get much more simpler, and even things such as data breach reporting. We must know if our data has been breached and we must be able to take action. So there's many things which are steps forward. And I think it's an important step. We can agree and disagree on particular provisions of the bill, and we must. But I think it's critical that we have a bill that protects the individual, and we have a bill that says that India wants to be a nation that is digitally sovereign. I think it's important for India as one of the leading economies of the world to assert that digital sovereignty with the little Indian at the core is what we are after, is what we are going to protect. And I think the bill to a large measure does that.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for taking us through the salient points of the bill and what is different this time round. It's definitely a story that all of us should watch, because our data is available everywhere right now. It's imperative that it's protected. What's also imperative for protection is our rights as patients. I'm going to take a very short break, but I'd urge you to come back, because after this, we're taking up a subject that matters to everyone. Did you know that there is a report out there that exposes the number of bribes doctors take from pharmaceutical companies to peddle their latest drugs. We're going to have that author of the report as well as a representative of the Indian Medical Association after this break. Don't go away.